There she was, standing in that very same kitchen where she'd spent years scrubbing floors for other folks. But now, Lord have mercy, now she owned every last bit of it. The man who'd once been her master was down on his knees before her, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Forgive me, Mary Bell. I've loved you for so long but was too much of a coward to say it. But after all that humiliation, all them years of being treated like she was nothing, did her heart still have room to forgive? And more importantly, could she trust a love that only came when the tables had turned?" Now listen here, y'all. This here story's gonna break your heart before it heals it, because it's about a young girl who had to crawl through hell just to find a glimpse of heaven. Mary Bell Johnson was just 16 years old when she came stumbling down that dusty red clay road, half-starved and desperate as a cornered animal. Lord have mercy, that child looked like death warmed over. Her cotton dress hung on her like rags on a scarecrow, and them bare feet were bleeding from walking miles on sharp stones. She hadn't eaten nothing but wild berries and creek water for 3 days straight. See, Mary Bell's mama had died screaming in childbirth, bleeding out while the midwife shook her head helpless-like. Her daddy, broken by grief and guilt, crawled so deep into a whiskey bottle that he forgot he had a daughter to raise. Little Mary Bell would find him passed out in his own vomit, would clean him up and beg him to eat something, but he'd just push her away with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. It was her grandmama, sweet old Meemaw Sarah, who saved her from that nightmare. But even Meemaw was poor as dirt, scratching out a living in them hills outside Huntsville, mending clothes for pennies and praying the Lord would provide their next meal. Then came that bitter February morning when Meemaw Sarah took sick with the fever. Mary Bell held that old woman's burning hand for 3 days, watching her waste away like a candle in the wind. "Child," Meemaw whispered, her voice rattling like dry leaves, "you got strength in you that you ain't even discovered yet. But this world's gonna try to crush you like a bug. Don't let it, promise me." Mary Bell promised, but when they buried Meemaw in the cold, hard ground, that promise felt like a lie. The county men came like vultures the very next week, taking the little shack for back taxes. They threw Mary Bell's few belongings in the mud and told her she had 1 hour to clear out. "Where am I supposed to go?" she'd cried, but they just shrugged and walked away. So there she was, walking toward Montgomery County, with her belly gnawing at itself and her heart broken in 1,000 pieces. She'd tried begging for work at 7 different houses, and each rejection cut deeper than a razor blade. At the Caldwell mansion, the missus looked at her like she was something nasty on her shoe. "Child, you look half wild. I wouldn't trust you to feed my pigs, let alone work in my house." At the Henderson place, they set their dogs on her when she wouldn't leave fast enough. By evening, Mary Bell was sitting by the roadside, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Her stomach was cramping something fierce, and she was starting to wonder if maybe it'd be easier just to lay down and die right there in the dirt. "God," she sobbed, "if you're really up there, why'd you make me just to watch me suffer?" That's when she heard them horse hooves. A carriage was coming, and for a wild moment she thought about throwing herself in front of it just to end the pain. But the driver, an old colored man with scars on his hands, pulled up gentle-like and looked at her with eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow. "Child," he said soft, "you look like you ain't eaten in days." Mary Bell tried to speak, but just started crying harder. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth. "Here now, eat this, slowly." That cornbread tasted like salvation itself. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "The Whitmore family needs a house girl," he said. "They ain't perfect, but they won't let you starve. You got anywhere else to go?" Mary Bell shook her head, tears still streaming. As that carriage rolled toward the Whitmore plantation, Mary Bell stared at the grand white house rising up like a fortress against the darkening sky. She didn't know she was about to enter a place where every dream and nightmare she'd ever had would come true. But Mary Bell didn't know that in that big house, fate was fixing to test every ounce of that strength Meemaw had seen in her before. We continue this emotional story. Put in the comments below which city you're watching from. It'll be a pleasure to give your comment a little heart. Now let's continue this exciting story. Well, now let me tell you what happened when that carriage pulled up to the grandest plantation house in all of Montgomery County. The Whitmore place rose up before Mary Bell like a white palace, with columns tall as pine trees and windows that sparkled like diamonds in the setting sun. But Lord have mercy, sometimes the prettiest houses hide the darkest secrets. The old driver, who told her his name was Samuel, helped Mary Bell down from that carriage with gentle hands. "Now, child," he whispered, You keep your head down and speak only when spoken to. Miss Margaret ain't like other ladies. She got ice in her veins where her heart should be. Mary Bell's knees were shaking like leaves in a storm as Samuel led her up the marble steps to the grand front door. But instead of knocking, he led her around back to the servants' entrance, a plain wooden door that looked about as welcoming as a grave. The kitchen was bigger than Mimor's entire shack had been, with pots and pans hanging from hooks and a wood-burning stove that looked like it could cook for an army. Standing by that stove was the largest woman Mary Bell had ever seen. Not fat, mind you, but tall and strong as an oak tree, with arms that looked like they could knead bread or break a man's neck, depending on her mood. "This here's Mama Ruth," Samuel said. "She runs this kitchen and what she says goes." Mama Ruth looked Mary Bell up and down like she was inspecting a horse at market. "Child, you look half dead. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Before Mary Bell could answer, footsteps echoed from the hallway, and the temperature in that room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A woman swept into the kitchen like a cold wind, wearing a dress so fine it probably cost more than most folks made in a year. This was Miss Margaret Whitmore, and she looked at Mary Bell like she was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "So, this is the girl," Miss Margaret said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "She looks sickly. Are you sure she won't collapse before dinner's served?" "I'm strong, Ma'am," Mary Bell managed to whisper, though her voice came out like a squeaky gate. "I can work hard." Miss Margaret circled her like a hawk circling a wounded rabbit. "Can you cook? Clean? Do laundry without ruining fine linens? Can you serve at table without embarrassing this family?" Each question hit Mary Bell like a slap. I can learn, Ma'am. I'm quick to pick things up." Miss Margaret's cold blue eyes seemed to see right through her. "Your quarters are in the attic. You'll rise at 4:30 every morning to start the fires and prepare breakfast. You'll work until the last dish is cleaned, which is usually past 10 at night. Sundays you may attend the colored folks' service after your morning duties are finished. Your wage is $3 a month minus the cost of your food and lodging. Is this arrangement acceptable? $3. Mary Bell's heart sank like a stone thrown in deep water. After food and lodging, there'd be barely enough left to buy a bar of soap. But what choice did she have? "Yes, Ma'am. One more thing." Miss Margaret's voice turned even colder. "My son, William James, is home from university. You are not to speak to him unless he addresses you directly. You are not to look at him. You are certainly not to entertain any foolish notions about your station in this house. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Ma'am," Mary Bell whispered, feeling smaller than an ant. That first night in the tiny attic room was the loneliest of Mary Bell's life. The space was barely big enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with one small window that looked out over the cotton fields. The mattress was thin as a communion wafer and lumpy as week-old porridge. She lay there listening to mice scratching in the walls and trying not to cry. At 4:30 the next morning, Mama Ruth's voice boomed up the stairs like thunder. "Girl, get yourself down here." Mary Bell stumbled down to the kitchen, her body aching from the hard bed and her heart heavy as lead. Mama Ruth put her to work immediately, hauling water, starting fires, scrubbing pots that seemed big enough to bathe a horse in. "Listen here, child," Mama Ruth said while Mary Bell's hands turned raw from the lye soap. "This house got more rules than the good book itself. You step out of line even once, and Miss Margaret will have you thrown out faster than you can say grace. But you do your work without complaining, keep your mouth shut, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive this place." The work was backbreaking. Mary Bell's hands cracked and bled from the harsh soap and scalding water. Her back ached from bending over washboards and scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Miss Margaret seemed to take pleasure in finding fault with everything. The silver wasn't shiny enough. The floors needed another scrubbing. The bread was a shade too brown. But it was on the third day that Mary Bell's world tilted sideways. She was carrying a tray of sweet tea to the front parlor when she nearly crashed into the most handsome man she'd ever laid eyes on. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that caught the afternoon light and eyes the color of summer sky. This had to be William James Jr., Miss Margaret's son. "Oh," Mary Bell gasped, nearly dropping the tray. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't see you there." Instead of the angry words she expected, William James smiled. Not a cold, proper smile like his mama's, but something warm and genuine that made Mary Bell's heart skip like a stone on water. "No harm done," he said, reaching out to steady the tray. His fingers brushed hers for just a moment, and Mary Bell felt something electric shoot through her whole body. "You must be the new house girl. I'm William James." "Mary Bell, sir," she managed to say, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. He studied her face with those blue eyes, and for a moment, Mary Bell forgot how to breathe. Mary Bell, he repeated like he was tasting her name. That's a pretty name for a pretty girl. Before Mary Bell could respond, Miss Margaret's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. "William James, what are you doing?" Mary Bell's blood turned to ice water. She'd broken the first and most important rule, and now she was surely going to pay for it. But what happened next would change everything between them, and Mary Bell had no idea that this simple moment was the first thread in a tapestry of love and heartbreak that would define the rest of her life. Now, y'all, what happened next was like watching a tornado form on a clear day. You know something powerful and dangerous is coming, but you can't do nothing but stand there and watch it. Build. Miss Margaret's cold eyes moved from her son to Mary Bell, like she was calculating how much damage had already been done. "William James," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "I believe you have correspondence to attend to in the study." "Yes, Mama," William James said, but his eyes lingered on Mary Bell's face just a moment too long. Long enough for Miss Margaret to notice, and long enough to seal Mary Bell's fate. After he walked away, Miss Margaret grabbed Mary Bell's arm so tight it left finger marks on her skin. "Come with me," she hissed, dragging the poor girl into the pantry where nobody could hear what was about to happen. "Let me make something crystal clear, you little nobody." Miss Margaret's words came out like poison. "My son is destined for great things. He will marry into the finest family in Alabama and carry on the Whitmore name with dignity. You are nothing but hired help. Less than nothing. If I catch you so much as looking at him again, I will have you thrown off this property so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me?" Mary Bell's whole body was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. Furthermore," Miss Margaret continued, "your workload has just doubled. Maybe if you're too exhausted to lift your head, you won't be tempted to forget your place again." And Lord have mercy, that woman meant every word. From that day forward, Mary Bell's life became a living nightmare. She was up before dawn scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, washing windows that were already clean, polishing silver that already gleamed. Her hands cracked and bled so bad that Mama Ruth started wrapping them in rags just so she could keep working. But the worst part wasn't the back-breaking labor. It was the way Miss Margaret watched her every move like a hawk circling prey. That woman had eyes everywhere, and she seemed to take pleasure in catching Mary Bell in the smallest mistakes just so she could heap more punishment on her. "This floor is still dirty," Miss Margaret would say, even when it was clean enough to eat. "Off of. Scrub it again. These dishes have water spots. Wash them all over. Your appearance is disgraceful. You're a reflection of this household." Poor Mary Bell was working 18 hours a day, getting maybe 4 hours of sleep on that hard attic, bed before the cycle started all over again. Her body was wasting away to nothing but skin and bones, and her hands were so raw and painful she could barely hold a scrub brush. But what kept her going through all that suffering was the memory of William James's smile and the way he'd said her name like it meant something special. She'd catch glimpses of him sometimes, reading on the front porch, riding his horse across the fields, talking with his daddy about plantation business, and every time their eyes met, even for just a second, she felt that same electric jolt that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than pain. William James started finding excuses to walk through the kitchen when Mary Bell was working. He'd ask Mama Ruth about the menu for dinner or request a glass of water, but his eyes would always find Mary Bell's face. Sometimes he'd say little things when his mama wasn't around. "Good morning, Mary Bell," or "That's a nice job you did on the silver." Those tiny moments of kindness were like drops of cool water in a desert. Mary Bell would carry them with her through the endless hours of labor, repeating his words in her mind when the pain got so bad she wanted to give up. Then came that evening. In late September, when everything changed, Mary Bell was in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner, her hands shaking from exhaustion, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and there was William James looking at her with those blue eyes full of concern. "Mary Bell," he said soft-like, "you look terrible. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" She tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. All the exhaustion and pain and loneliness of the past weeks came crashing down on her like a dam busting open. Before she could stop herself, tears started pouring down her face like summer rain. "Hey now," William James said, stepping closer. "What's wrong? Has someone been mistreating you?" Mary Bell wanted to tell him everything about his mama's threats, about the impossible workload, about how she felt like she was dying a little more each day. But she also knew that telling him would only make things worse. "I'm fine, sir," she whispered. wiping her eyes with her torn apron. "Just tired is all." But William James wasn't fooled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. Not just any handkerchief, but one made of the finest white cotton with his initials embroidered in blue thread. "Here," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Keep it." The touch of his fingers against hers sent warmth spreading through her whole body like sunshine after a storm. For just a moment, standing there in that kitchen with his handkerchief in her hand, Mary Bell felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone in this world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mary Bell," William James said, his voice low and urgent, "I want you to know that not everyone in this house thinks. You're invisible, you matter, you're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're special." Before Mary Bell could respond, they heard Miss Margaret's voice echoing through the hallway like the sound of doom approaching. "William James, where are you?" He stepped back quickly, but the damage was already done. Mary Bell clutched that handkerchief like it was a lifeline, not knowing that she was holding the first thread of a love that would either save her or destroy her completely. And what neither of them knew was that Miss Margaret had been watching from the doorway, and her heart was already blackened with a fury that would make their next encounter feel like walking through the fires of hell itself. Well, now, what happened the very next morning was like watching the devil himself come knocking at your door. Miss Margaret stormed into that kitchen before the rooster even had a chance to crow, her face twisted with a rage that could have melted iron. "You!" She pointed at Mary Bell like she was pointing at a snake. "Pack your belongings this instant. You are no longer welcome in this house." Mary Bell's heart dropped to her stomach like a stone thrown down a well. "Ma'am, what did I do wrong? Don't you dare play innocent with me." Miss Margaret's voice was shaking with fury. "I saw you seducing my son last night, filling his head with your wicked notions. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Poor Mary Bell was trembling like a leaf in a tornado. "Ma'am, I wasn't seducing nobody. Master William James was just being kind to me." "Kind?" Miss Margaret let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "You think my son's kindness means something special? You're nothing but a poor fountain girl with dirt under her fingernails and holes in her dress. My son will marry quality, not trash." Each word hit Mary Bell like a physical blow. She clutched William James's handkerchief hidden in her apron pocket, drawing what little strength she could from that small token of kindness. "Please, ma'am," Mary Bell begged, tears streaming down her face. "I got nowhere else to go. I'll work harder, I promise. I won't even look at Master William James again." "Too late for promises," Miss Margaret said, cold as January ice. "You've already poisoned this house with your presence. Samuel will drive you to town within the hour." That's when they heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, and William James came rushing into the kitchen, still wearing his nightclothes. "Mama, what's all this yelling about?" "I'm removing a problem before it gets worse," Miss Margaret said, her voice sharp as a razor blade. William James looked from his mama to Mary Bell's tear-stained face, and his expression changed from confusion to understanding to something that looked like quiet fury. "Mama," he said, his voice steady but dangerous, "you can't just throw her out on the street. She's got nowhere to go." "That's not our concern," Miss Margaret replied. She should have thought about that before she started getting ideas above her station. "What ideas?" William James demanded. "All I did was give her a handkerchief because she was crying. Is showing basic Christian kindness now forbidden in this house?" Miss Margaret's face turned red as a ripe tomato. "Don't you dare lecture me about Christian kindness, William James Whitmore Jr. I'm protecting this family's reputation and your future. That girl is not suitable company for someone of your position. Since when do you decide who's suitable for me?" William James shot back, his voice rising like thunder before a storm. Mary Bell watched this battle between mother and son, with her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. She could see the pain in William James's eyes, could see how much it was costing him to stand up to his mama. But she also knew that Miss Margaret held all the power in this house, and Mary Bell was just a pawn in their family drama. "Stop," Mary Bell whispered, then louder. "Please stop." Both of them turned to look at her, and she gathered what little dignity she had left. "I'll go. I don't want to cause no more trouble for this family." She looked directly at William James, memorizing every detail of his face, them blue eyes that had shown her kindness, the strong jaw that was clenched with frustration, the hands that had touched hers so gently. "Thank you for your kindness, sir," she said, formal-like. "I won't forget it." Then she turned and walked up them narrow stairs to her tiny attic room for the last time. Her few belongings fit into that same worn carpet bag she'd arrived with, a change of clothes, her mama's old Bible, and William James's handkerchief. which she pressed to her face one last time before tucking it deep into the bag. When Samuel drove her to town in that same carriage that had brought her to the plantation, Mary Bell didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see that big white house growing smaller in the distance, knowing she was leaving behind the first place she'd felt even a glimmer of happiness since Meemore died. In town, she found a tiny room above the general store that cost 50 cents a week. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with one window that looked out on the alley where folks threw their garbage. The mattress was thinner than a communion wafer and smelled like mildew, but it was hers. The next morning, Mary Bell walked to the textile mill on the edge of town. The foreman looked her up and down like she was livestock at auction. "You ever worked a mill before?" he asked. "No, sir, but I'm a fast learner and I ain't afraid of hard work." He hired her for 25 cents a day, barely enough to pay for her room and one meal. The work was brutal, standing for 12 hours tending machines that sounded like thunder and filled the air with cotton dust that made everyone cough like they was dying. Mary Bell's hands, already scarred from kitchen work, soon became cut and calloused from handling the rough machinery. But even worse than the physical pain was the emptiness in her heart. Every night she'd lay on that thin mattress and wonder what William James was doing, if he ever thought about the poor mountain girl who dared to care about him. What she didn't know was that William James was thinking about her every day, and that the fight with his mama had changed something fundamental inside him, something that would drive him to make a decision that would shake the very foundations of everything he'd been raised to believe. Well now, let me tell you about the next 3 years of Mary Bell's life, because they was years that would have broken a lesser soul, but instead forged her into something stronger than Alabama steel. That textile mill was like working in the belly of a beast. Every day, Mary Bell stood for 12 hours in air so thick, with cotton dust you could barely breathe, tending machines that roared louder than summer thunder. Her hands became a map of cuts and calluses. Her back ached like she was carrying the weight of the world, and that constant coughing from the dust made her chest burn like fire. But Lord have mercy, that girl had Meemore Sarah's strength running through her veins. While other workers complained and gave up, Mary Bell kept her head down and her spirit up. She saved every penny she could, eating nothing but cornbread and beans most days, dreaming of something better. In the evenings, when her body was screaming with exhaustion, Mary Bell would sit by that tiny window and study by candlelight. She'd borrowed books from the preacher at the little Baptist church, books on arithmetic, reading and writing. Her fingers were too sore to hold a pencil steady at first, but she kept practicing until her handwriting was neat as any schoolma'am's. "Child," old Pastor Williams would say when she came to Sunday service, "you got a light in your eyes that ain't dimmed, despite all your suffering. The Lord's got plans for you, mark my words." Mary Bell held on to them words like they was a lifeline, especially during the dark winter nights when the cold seeped through the thin walls, and she wondered if she'd ever feel truly warm again. Then came that terrible spring morning when she picked up the Montgomery County Herald and saw the announcement that made her heart shatter like glass hitting stone. There in black and white was the engagement notice. William James Whitmore Jr. to wed Miss Patricia Ann Beauregard, daughter of plantation owner Colonel Beauregard. Mary Bell's hand started shaking so bad she dropped that newspaper right there on the floor. She ran to her tiny room and cried until there wasn't no tears left in her body. All them dreams she'd been carrying, foolish dreams about William James maybe coming to find her, maybe standing up to his mama for real, crumbled to dust right then and there. "God," she whispered through her tears, "why does loving someone have to hurt so much?" But even in her heartbreak, Mary Bell didn't let herself stay down long. "If he's moving on with his life," she told herself, "then I got to move on with mine too." She took what little money she'd saved and opened a tiny food stand outside the mill, selling biscuits and sweet tea to the workers. Folks started coming, not just for the food, but for Mary Bell's warm smile and kind words. Soon she had enough customers to rent a small storefront, and her little business started growing like wildflowers after rain. The work was still backbreaking, up before dawn, baking biscuits, working the mill all day, then cooking and cleaning for the store until late at night. But for the first time since leaving the Whitmore plantation, Mary Bell felt like she was building something that belonged to her. Then, on a hot August day that shimmered with heat, like the very air was on fire, Samuel appeared at her store door. Mary Bell's heart nearly stopped when she saw him. Older now, his hair gone completely grey, but them same kind eyes she remembered. "Miss Mary Bell," he said, hat in hand, "I got a message for you." "From who?" she asked, though her heart was already hammering like a woodpecker on tin. Miss Margaret Whitmore, Samuel said, his voice heavy with sorrow. She's taken ill, real ill. The doctors say she ain't got long. She's asked for you to come back to the plantation. Mary Bell's first instinct was to laugh at the bitter irony of it all. The woman who'd thrown her out like garbage now wanted her back on her deathbed. But then she saw the genuine sadness in Samuel's eyes and remembered what Pastor Williams always preached about, forgiveness being the hardest but most important commandment. Why me? Mary Bell asked. She's got plenty of other folks to care for her. Samuel shook his head. She's tried 3 different nurses, but none of them can do things the way she likes. She keeps asking for that mountain girl who knew how to run a proper household. I think she's got regrets, Miss Mary Bell. Mary Bell stood there in her little store, surrounded by everything she'd built with her own 2 hands, and felt the weight of that decision pressing down on her like a mountain. Going back meant facing William James again, now a married man. It meant opening old wounds that had barely healed, but it also meant being the bigger person, showing the kind of Christian grace that Meemaw Sarah had taught her. When does she need me? Mary Bell asked quietly. Soon as you can come, Samuel replied. She ain't got much time left. That night, Mary Bell packed that same old carpet bag she'd carried so many times before. She looked around her little store. Her achievement, her independence, her proof that she was more than just a poor mountain girl with nothing to offer the world. Leaving it felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. But as she locked the door and handed the key to her neighbor, with instructions to keep the business running, Mary Bell whispered a prayer. Lord, give me strength to face whatever's waiting for me in that big house, and help me forgive the way you forgave us. The next morning, as Samuel's carriage rolled down that familiar oak-lined drive, Mary Bell saw the Whitmore plantation house rising up before her once again. But this time, she wasn't the scared, desperate girl who'd first arrived with nothing but hope in her heart. This time she was returning as a woman who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger than steel, and she had no idea that walking through that front door was going to change not just Miss Margaret's life, but her own destiny, in ways she never could have imagined. But what Mary Bell didn't know was that inside that house, William James was pacing the floors like a caged animal, dreading and longing for her arrival in equal measure, and that the woman he'd married was about to make a discovery that would turn their whole world upside down. Well, now, when Mary Bell stepped through that plantation house door after 3 long years, it was like watching a butterfly return to the place where it used to be a caterpillar. The scared little mountain girl was gone, replaced by a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity, earned through suffering and hard work. Miss Margaret lay in that grand master bedroom like a shadow of her former self, her skin pale as morning mist and her once sharp eyes dulled by sickness. When she saw Mary Bell standing in the doorway, tears started rolling down her hollow cheeks. Mary Bell, she whispered, her voice weak as autumn wind through dry leaves. You came back? Yes, ma'am, Mary Bell said, setting down her carpet bag and approaching the bed with careful steps. Samuel said you needed help. Miss Margaret tried to sit up but couldn't manage it. I've been terrible to you, child. Worse than terrible. Mary Bell pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. That's in the past now, Miss Margaret. What matters is getting you well. But they both knew Miss Margaret wasn't getting well. The consumption had taken hold of her lungs, and each breath was a struggle that echoed through the room like distant thunder. Over the next weeks, Mary Bell tended to Miss Margaret with the same gentle care she'd have given Meemaw Sarah. She spooned broth into the woman's mouth when she couldn't lift her own arms, read scripture aloud when the pain got too bad for talking, and sat through the long nights when Miss Margaret was afraid to close her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? Miss Margaret asked one evening when the sunset was painting the sky orange and gold. After everything I'd done to you? Mary Bell looked up from the quilt she was mending, the same quilt Miss Margaret had criticized so harshly years before. Because that's what the Lord teaches us to do, she said simply. Love our enemies and forgive those who hurt us. During them long days of nursing, Mary Bell couldn't help but notice how the household had changed. The other servants looked at her with respect now, seeing how she'd returned not for revenge but for mercy. Even Mama Ruth, still strong as an oak despite her age, nodded approvingly. "You've grown into a fine woman, child," Mama Ruth said one afternoon, while they prepared Miss Margaret's medicines. "Got backbone now, but your heart's still soft where it needs to be." The hardest part wasn't tending to Miss Margaret's physical needs. It was seeing William James every day, and pretending her heart wasn't breaking all over again. He was thinner than she remembered, lines of worry carved around his eyes like furrows in a field. His marriage to Patricia Ann had clearly brought him no joy. Patricia Ann herself was everything Mary Bell wasn't, tall and elegant, with golden hair piled high and dresses that cost more than most folks made in a year. But she was also cold as January frost and about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. She spent her days shopping or visiting friends, leaving all the caring for Miss Margaret to Mary Bell. That woman don't know how to boil water, let alone tend to sick folks, Mama Ruth muttered one day. All beauty and no substance, like a pretty flower with no roots. William James tried to talk to Mary Bell several times, but she kept their conversations proper and distant. When he asked about her life in town, she answered briefly. When he complimented her kindness toward his mama, she just nodded and continued her work. But Lord have mercy, it was torture being so close to him, and having to act like he didn't still make her heart skip like a stone on water. Every accidental touch when they passed in the hallway sent electricity through her whole body. Every time their eyes met across his mama's sickbed, she saw the same longing and regret that was tearing her apart inside. One terrible night, Miss Margaret's condition worsened dramatically. She was burning with fever and struggling for every breath. Mary Bell sent word for the doctor, but everyone knew it was too late for medicine to help. William James paced the floor like a caged animal, while Mary Bell bathed his mama's fevered brow with cool cloths. Patricia Ann had taken to her own room with a headache, leaving them alone with the dying woman. Mary Bell, Miss Margaret gasped, her hand reaching out blindly. Come close, child. Mary Bell leaned in, and Miss Margaret's weak fingers gripped hers with surprising strength. I got to tell you something before I meet my maker, Miss Margaret whispered. About your mama, about who she really was. William James stopped pacing and moved closer, his face pale with confusion and concern. What about my mama? Mary Bell asked, her heart starting to pound like thunder before a storm. Miss Margaret's eyes fixed on Mary Bell's face with an intensity that seemed to burn through the fever. Your mama, she wasn't just any poor mountain girl. She was my cousin Eleanor's child. Eleanor Whitmore, that makes you family, Mary Bell, real family. The words hit Mary Bell like lightning striking a tree. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her place in the world, crumbled in an instant. That's impossible, she whispered. Your daddy, he was my cousin Benjamin Whitmore, Miss Margaret continued, her voice getting weaker with each word. He ran off to the mountains when he was young, fell in love with a Cherokee girl. When she died having you, he brought you to your grandmama and disappeared. We never told nobody because Miss Margaret's voice faded away, but her eyes said what her words couldn't. Because you were born of love between a white man and a Cherokee woman, and that kind of love was dangerous in Alabama. Mary Bell sat there in shock, her whole world tilted sideways. She wasn't just a poor mountain girl with nothing to offer. She was a Whitmore. She had family blood running through her veins. But what this revelation would mean for her future, and for her complicated feelings toward William James, that was something nobody in that room could have predicted. Well now, what happened? After Miss Margaret's revelation was like watching a thunderstorm tear through a peaceful valley, everything that seemed solid and certain got turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Miss Margaret passed away that very night, slipping into eternal rest just as the sun was rising over the cotton fields. Her last words were a whispered apology to Mary Bell, and she died holding the hand of the girl she'd once treated like dirt beneath her feet. But Lord have mercy, the real storm was just beginning. 3 days after the funeral, when the last of the mourners had gone home and the house felt hollow as an empty church, Colonel James Whitmore called Mary Bell into his study. Sit down, child, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. We need to talk about what Margaret told you before she died. Mary Bell perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than she'd made in a whole year at the mill. Sir, if it's about me being family, I don't expect nothing from y'all. I'm grateful just knowing the truth. Colonel Whitmore studied her with tired eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Mary Bell, my wife may have been hard on you, but she was an honest woman. If she said you're Benjamin's daughter, then you're a Whitmore by blood. And that means something in this family. He pulled out a thick leather folder and set it on the desk between them. This here is my will, child. I've been revising it since Margaret's confession. When I pass on half of this plantation, the house, the land, the cotton operation, it all goes to you. Mary Bell's heart nearly stopped beating. Sir, I can't. That ain't right. William James is your son. Everything should go to him. William James will get his fair share, the colonel said firmly. But you've shown more character and loyalty to this family, than most blood relatives ever do. You earned this through your actions, not your birth. Before Mary Bell could respond, the study door burst open, and Patricia Ann swept in like a hurricane, in silk and pearls. Her face was red with fury and her hands were shaking with rage. "Is it true?" she demanded, pointing at Mary Bell like she was pointing at a snake. "Is she really getting half of everything?" "Patricia Ann," Colonel Whitmore said wearily, "this is a private family matter." "Family?" Patricia Ann let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "She's not family. She's just some mountain girl with Indian blood who wormed her way into this house." The cruel words hit Mary Bell like physical blows, but she sat up straighter and kept her dignity intact. She'd learned through years of suffering that other people's hate said more about them than it did about her. "Will you watch your tongue, young lady?" Colonel Whitmore warned, his voice turning cold as winter wind. But Patricia Ann was beyond listening to reason. "I won't stand for this. I married into this family expecting certain things, and I won't be cheated out of what's rightfully mine." That's when William James appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. His face was pale, and his eyes darted between his wife's furious expression and Mary Bell's calm dignity. "What's all this commotion about?" he asked. "Your father's lost his mind," Patricia Ann shrieked. "He's given half our inheritance to the help." William James looked at Mary Bell, and she saw something complicated pass across his features. Surprise, understanding, and something that might have been relief. "Is it true about Mary Bell being family?" he asked his father quietly. "It's true," Colonel Whitmore confirmed. "She's your cousin's son, Benjamin Whitmore's daughter." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Patricia Ann turned on Mary Bell with venom in her voice. "Well, cousin or not, I won't live under the same roof as you. This is intolerable." She whirled around to face William James. "Choose, William James. It's her or me." William James stood there for what felt like an eternity, his face a mask of conflict and pain. Mary Bell could see the battle raging in his soul, duty against desire, social expectations against his heart's truth. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Patricia Ann, you're my wife. I took vows before God." Patricia Ann's face twisted into a satisfied smirk. "Good, then get rid of her." But William James wasn't finished talking. "However," he continued, "Mary Bell is family now, and family doesn't get gotten rid of. She has every right to be here." Patricia Ann's face went white with shock, then red with rage. "Fine," she screamed. "If that's how you want it, then I'm leaving. I'm going back to my father's house, and I'm taking whatever I can legally claim from this marriage." She stormed out of the room, leaving behind a silence so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Colonel Whitmore sighed heavily. "Son, I'm sorry. It had to come to this." William James looked at Mary Bell with eyes full of pain and regret. "I should have chosen differently 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Should have been brave enough to follow my heart instead of my mama's expectations." Mary Bell felt her own heart breaking all over again. But she also felt something else, a strange sense of justice finally being served. Not because Patricia Ann was leaving, but because the truth was finally out in the open. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways," she said softly. "Maybe this is all happening for a reason we can't see yet." What none of them knew was that Patricia Ann's departure was going to set off a chain of events that would test Mary Bell's newfound status and William James's true character in ways that would make everything they'd been through seem like a gentle summer rain compared to the tornado that was coming. Well, now let me tell you what happened in the weeks following Patricia Ann's dramatic departure, because it was like watching the aftermath of a tornado. Everything familiar was scattered to the winds, and folks didn't know which way was up anymore. Patricia Ann made good on her threats, bringing lawyers from Montgomery who swarmed the plantation like locusts on a cotton field. They claimed she was entitled to half of William James's portion of the inheritance, and they was fixing to fight tooth and nail for every acre and every penny. "That woman's more interested in money than she ever was in love," Mama Ruth muttered, while she kneaded bread with unusual force. "Good riddance, I say." But the legal battles were draining the plantation's resources faster than water through a cracked bucket. Colonel Whitmore aged 10 years in 10 weeks, the worry lines deepening around his eyes as he met with lawyers and accountants who all seemed to bring nothing but bad news. Mary Bell found herself in the strangest position of her life. One day she was tending to dying Miss Margaret, and the next she was supposedly co-owner of the grandest plantation in Montgomery County. But instead of celebrating, she was tormented by the knowledge that her good fortune was tearing apart the only family she'd ever known. "I can't accept this inheritance," she told Colonel Whitmore one evening as they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the cotton fields gold. "It's causing too much pain for everyone." "Child," the old man said, his voice heavy with the exhaustion, "you can't run from your birthright just because it makes other folks uncomfortable. Margaret was right. You earned your place here through your character, not just your blood." But Mary Bell's heart was heavy as lead. Every day she watched William James struggle with his demons, pace in the halls of the big house like a ghost, haunting the scene of his own mistakes. The man was eating himself alive with regret, and she could see it in every line of his face. The town gossips were having a field day with the scandal. At Sunday service, Mary Bell could feel the stares and whispers following her like shadows. Some folks thought she was a conniving woman who'd somehow tricked her way into wealth. Others whispered about her Cherokee blood like it was some kind of curse. "Pay them no mind," Pastor Williams advised, after a particularly uncomfortable service. "The Lord sees your heart, child, and that's all that matters." But the isolation was nearly unbearable. Mary Bell had gone from being invisible to being the center of attention, and neither position brought her any peace. She missed the simple clarity of her little shop in town, where she knew her place and her purpose. Then came the October evening that changed everything. Mary Bell was in the garden behind the big house, tending to Miss Margaret's roses and trying to find some quiet in her troubled soul, when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. William James approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his, back and his face etched with a pain so deep it made Mary Bell's heart ache just looking at him. "May I sit with you?" he asked, gesturing to the old wooden bench beneath the magnolia tree. "It's your garden," Mary Bell replied, though her voice came out softer than she intended. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the last light fade from the sky and listening to the evening chorus of crickets and tree frogs. Finally, William James spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what my mama said before she died," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "About you being family, about how blind I was to what was right in front of me." Mary Bell kept her eyes fixed on the roses, afraid to look at him directly. "The past is the past, William James. Ain't no use dwelling on what might have been." "But that's just it," he said, turning to face her. "I don't think it is past. I think I made the biggest mistake of my life when I didn't fight harder for you 3 years ago." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Mary Bell felt her heart start to pound like thunder before a storm, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You were married before God," she said quietly. "That meant something whether Patricia Ann honored it or not." "I was married to a woman who never loved me," William James said, his voice thick with bitterness. "A woman who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pleasant face. But you saw something in me worth loving when I was just a foolish young man who didn't know his own heart." Mary Bell finally turned to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. There was love there, real love, not the desperate passion of youth, but the deep, steady kind that comes from truly knowing someone's soul. "William James," she whispered, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Patricia Ann's lawyers might be draining my bank account, but they can't take away the fact that I love you," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "I've loved you since that first day you dropped that tray of sweet tea. I loved you when I was too much of a coward to say. So I loved you through every day of my miserable marriage, and I'll love you until the day I die." Mary Bell felt tears starting to flow down her cheeks like a spring rain. "But I ain't got nothing to offer you now but trouble and scandal. Your name would be ruined if you chose me. My name ain't worth a Confederate dollar if I don't have you to share it with," William James said fiercely. "I'd rather be William James Nobody with you than William James Whitmore without you." Before Mary Bell could respond, they heard horses approaching on the main road, several horses riding hard and fast. Samuel appeared from the direction of the stables, his face grim with worry. "Master William James," he called out, "you better come quick. There's riders coming and they don't look friendly." As they hurried toward the front of the house, Mary Bell's blood turned cold when she saw the group of men dismounting from their horses. Leading them was Patricia Ann's father, Colonel Beauregard, and his face was twisted with a rage that promised nothing but trouble. "I got legal papers here," Colonel Beauregard shouted, waving a document in the air. "My daughter's entitled to her share of this property, and I'm here to make sure she gets it." But what Colonel Beauregard and his men didn't know was that Colonel Whitmore had been expecting this day, and he'd made preparations that would turn their greedy plans upside down. The real battle for the heart and soul of the Whitmore plantation was about to begin, and Mary Bell was going to discover just how much she was willing to fight for the love she'd waited her whole life to find. Now, y'all, what happened next was like watching divine justice and human love collide in the most beautiful and terrible way imaginable. Colonel Beauregard stood there on that front porch like he owned the place, waving them legal papers like, "They was the keys to the kingdom. My daughter's been grievously wronged," he declared, his voice booming across the cotton fields. "She married into this family in good faith, and she deserves her rightful share of what she was promised." Colonel Whitmore emerged from the house with dignity intact, despite his weariness. "Your daughter abandoned her marriage vows and her husband, Beauregard. She's entitled to whatever the law says, nothing more. The law says she gets half of everything William James inherited," Colonel Beauregard shot back. "And I mean to see she gets it, even if I have to tear this place apart board by board." Mary Bell watched this confrontation with her heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. She could see the pain etched deep in William James's face as he realized his youthful mistake was going to cost his family everything they'd built over generations. That's when Colonel Whitmore did something that surprised everyone present. He smiled. Not a bitter smile, but something peaceful and knowing. "Actually, Beauregard," he said calmly, "your daughter ain't entitled to quite as much as you think. You see, I had my lawyer draw up some special papers after Margaret's confession about Mary Bell's true parentage." He pulled out a document from his coat pocket, and Mary Bell noticed his hands weren't shaking like they had been in recent weeks. For the first time in months, the old man looked like he had everything under control. "This here's an amended will," Colonel Whitmore continued. "Since Mary Bell is family by blood, and since she's shown more loyalty to this household than anyone else, I'm granting her immediate co-ownership of the entire plantation. That means Patricia Ann can only claim a share of William James's portion, which just got considerably smaller." Colonel Beauregard's face turned red as a ripe tomato. "You can't do that. It ain't legal." "It's perfectly legal," Colonel Whitmore replied. "Mary Bell's been managing the household and plantation business for months now, proving herself more capable than anyone anticipated. This arrangement protects the family legacy while giving everyone their due." But what nobody expected was what happened next. Patricia Ann herself stepped out from behind her father's men, and Mary Bell gasped at the sight of her. The once beautiful woman looked terrible, thin as a rail, her golden hair dulled and stringy, her fine clothes wrinkled and stained. The months of bitter legal battles had taken their toll on more than just bank accounts. "I don't want the money anymore," Patricia Ann said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the porch. I just want this nightmare to end." Everyone stared at her in shock. Colonel Beauregard grabbed his daughter's arm. "What are you saying, girl? We come all this way to get what's rightfully yours." "Nothing about this was ever right, Daddy," Patricia Ann said, tears starting to flow down her hollow cheeks. "I married a man I didn't love for money I didn't need, and I ruined his life and mine in the process." She looked directly at William. James, and Mary Bell could see genuine remorse in her eyes for the first time ever. "I'm sorry, William James," Patricia Ann whispered. "I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better than what I gave you. And Mary Bell deserves the love I was too selfish to appreciate." Before anyone could respond, the sound of thunder rumbled across the sky, and suddenly the heavens opened up with the kind of rain that only comes to Alabama in late autumn. Hard, driving rain that seemed to wash the very air clean. In the confusion of everyone running for cover, Patricia Ann slipped away from her father's men and approached Mary Bell directly. "He loves you," she said simply, rain streaming down both their faces. "He's always loved you. I knew it from the first day I met you, and I hated you for it. But I can't hate you anymore. I'm too tired to hate anyone." "Patricia Ann," Mary Bell said gently, "what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to go home to my mama. Can't try to figure out who I am when I ain't trying to be somebody else," Patricia Ann replied. "And I'm going to sign whatever papers need signing to set William James free. He's suffered enough for my mistakes." That night, after Patricia Ann and her father had departed and the legal documents were signed, Mary Bell found herself alone in the big house parlor with William James. The fire was crackling in the fireplace, casting warm light across the room that had seen so much joy and sorrow over the years. "I can't believe it's really over," William James said, sinking into the chair across from her. "All these years of carrying guilt and regret. And now what?" Mary Bell asked softly. "Now I'm free to love you the way I should have loved you from the beginning," he said, dropping to his knees in front of her chair. "Mary Bell Whitmore, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Mary Bell looked into those blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for so many years, and she saw not the confused young man who'd let his mama choose his bride, but a man who'd been tested by fire and emerged with his character intact. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with tears of joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." When they kissed for the first time, with the storm raging outside and the fire warming their faces, Mary Bell felt like every moment of suffering and loneliness had been leading to this single perfect instant. All the pain, all the heartbreak, all the years of wondering if she'd ever find true love, it all made sense now. But even as they held each other close, Mary Bell couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't quite finished yet. The Lord had brought them through so much already, but she sensed there was still one more chapter to be written in their love story. 3 months later, on a crisp February morning, with the dogwood trees just starting to bud, Mary Bell Johnson became Mary Bell Whitmore in a simple ceremony at the Little Baptist Church, where Pastor Williams had counseled her through her darkest hours. The whole community came to witness the union, and even folks who'd gossiped about her before seemed genuinely happy to see love triumph over all the obstacles that had tried to keep them apart. As they exchanged vows before God and their neighbors, Mary Bell thought about Mimor Sarah's last words, about having strength she hadn't discovered yet. The old woman had been right. Mary Bell had found strength not just to survive, but to forgive, to love, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of heartbreak. But what neither Mary Bell nor William James knew was that their greatest test was still ahead of them, and it would come in a form that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the mysterious ways the Lord works in the lives of those who trust in His plan. Well now, let me tell you about the final chapter of Mary Bell and William James's story, because it's going to show you that sometimes the Lord's greatest blessings come disguised as the hardest trials, and that true love ain't just about the good times, it's about weathering every storm together. 5 years after their wedding, Mary Bell and William James had built something beautiful together on that old plantation. They'd transformed it from a place of rigid social rules and bitter family secrets into a home filled with laughter, love, and Christian compassion. The cotton fields still stretched to the horizon, but now they was worked by paid laborers who were treated with dignity and respect. Mary Bell had never forgotten her humble beginnings. Every month, she'd take the carriage into town to visit the textile mill where she'd once worked those brutal 12-hour days. She'd hire young girls who reminded her of herself, orphaned, desperate, with calloused hands and hope in their eyes, and teach them skills that would help them build better lives. "You don't owe nobody nothing for the circumstances of your birth," she'd tell them, echoing the wisdom Mimor Sarah had planted in her heart so many years ago. "But you owe yourself everything: education, dignity, and the chance to become who God intended you to be." The big house had been transformed too. Where Miss Margaret's cold formality once reigned, now there was warmth and welcome. The kitchen was always filled with the sounds of Mama Ruth's cooking and the laughter of children from the community who came for Bible study and reading lessons that Mary Bell taught every Wednesday evening. William James had grown into the kind of man his daddy always hoped he'd become: strong without being harsh, prosperous without being greedy, respected without being feared. He'd modernized the plantation's operations, treating workers fairly and sharing profits in ways that would have scandalized his mama, but made his daddy proud. But Lord have mercy, their greatest joy and their deepest sorrow was tied up in the same heartbreaking truth. Mary Bell couldn't carry a child to term. 3 times in 5 years she'd felt new life quickening within her, and 3 times she'd lost those precious babies before they could draw their first breath. Each loss nearly broke them both. William James would find Mary Bell crying in the garden where they'd first confessed their love, and he'd hold her while she sobbed out her grief and confusion. Why would God give us so much and then deny us this? She'd ask through her tears. Am I being punished for something? Darling, William James would whisper, his own voice thick with unshed tears. God ain't punishing you. Sometimes His plans are bigger than our understanding. The 3rd loss was the hardest. Mary Bell had carried that baby longer than the others. Long enough to feel movement, long enough to start dreaming about tiny fingers and first words. When the bleeding started on that cold December night, she knew even before the doctor arrived that another piece of her heart was going to be buried in the little cemetery behind the Baptist church. For weeks afterward, Mary Bell could barely get out of bed. The woman who'd survived poverty, abuse, and heartbreak seemed broken by this final blow. She'd stare out the window at the bare winter fields and wonder if her body was as damaged as her early life had been difficult. It was Pastor Williams who helped her find her way back to hope. He came to visit one grey January afternoon and found Mary Bell sitting in the parlor like a ghost of herself. "Child," he said gently, "you've been carrying a burden that ain't yours to bear. Some folks are meant to birth children of their bodies, and some are meant to birth children of their hearts. The Lord's got different callings for different people. But I wanted to give William James a son," Mary Bell whispered. "I wanted to carry on the family name properly." "Look around you," Pastor Williams said, gesturing toward the window where they could see children from the community playing in the yard. "You and William James got more children than most families ever dream of. Every girl you've rescued from poverty, every young man William James has taught to read, every family you've helped through hard times, they're all your legacy." That spring brought an unexpected blessing that would change everything. A woman appeared at their door on a rainy April morning, carrying a baby wrapped in a tattered quilt. She was young, maybe 17, and Mary Bell could see her own desperate past reflected in the girl's frightened eyes. "Please," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I heard tell you folks help people in trouble. I got nowhere else to turn." Her name was Sarah, named after Meemaw Sarah, though she didn't know it, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. Orphaned, abandoned by the baby's father, thrown out by her employer when her condition became apparent. She'd walked for 3 days to reach the Whitmore plantation, surviving on wild berries and spring water. "I can work," Sarah insisted, clutching her baby protectively. "I can earn my keep. I just need somewhere safe for my little boy." Mary Bell took one look at that tiny infant, no more than 2 weeks old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right into her soul, and felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't the biological child she'd dreamed of, but maybe this was the child God had been preparing for her all along. "What's his name?" Mary Bell asked softly. "James," Sarah replied. "I named him James because it seemed like a strong name for a boy who's going to need to be strong in this world." William James stepped forward then, and Mary Bell saw tears in his eyes as he looked at the baby who bore his name. "Sarah," he said gently, "you and little James got a home here for as long as you need it. But I got to ask, what do you want? For your boy's future." Sarah's voice broke as she answered, "I want him to have chances I can't give him. I want him to get educated and grow up knowing he's loved and valuable, but I don't know if I can provide that myself." That night, Mary Bell and William James sat up talking until dawn, weighing the enormous decision before them. By morning, they knew what they had to do. "Sarah," Mary Bell said when the young mother came down for breakfast, "William James and I got a proposition for you. We'd like to adopt little James legally, give him our name and all the advantages that come with it, but we want you to stay too, be part of our family. This house is big enough for all of us, and that boy needs his mama." What followed was the most beautiful arrangement Mary Bell could have imagined. Sarah became like the daughter she'd never had, and little James grew up with 2 mothers who loved him fiercely. The boy thrived in ways that proved Pastor Williams right. Some children are meant to be born of the heart rather than the body. As the years passed, the Whitmore plantation became known throughout Alabama as a place where broken people found healing, where the forgotten discovered their worth, and where love multiplied instead of being divided. Mary Bell and William James never did have biological children, but their family grew in ways that surpassed their wildest dreams. Young, James Whitmore grew up to be everything they'd hoped: educated, compassionate, strong in his faith, and committed to justice. When he was old enough to understand his story, he thanked God for the circumstances that brought him to parents who chose him out of love rather than obligation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mary Bell and William James sat on that same garden bench where he'd first proposed, watching their chosen son play with other children whose lives they'd touched. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and Mary Bell felt a peace deeper than anything she'd ever known. "Do you ever regret it?" William James asked, taking her hand in his. "All the suffering we went through to get here." Mary Bell thought about 16-year-old girl who'd walked down that red dirt road with nothing but hope in her heart. She thought about the years of back-breaking labor, the heartbreak of lost love, the devastation of lost babies. Then she looked at the life they'd built together. Not perfect but purposeful, not easy but meaningful. "No," she said firmly. "Every tear we cried, every obstacle we faced, every moment we thought we couldn't go on, it all led us here. And here is exactly where God intended us to be." As the stars came out over Alabama that night, Mary Bell Johnson Whitmore knew that her story wasn't just about a house girl who became a plantation mistress. It was about a soul learning that true wealth comes not from what you own, but from what you give. Not from what you receive, but from what you sacrifice. And not from the family you're born into, but from the family you choose to love. Now listen here, y'all. Mary Bell's story ain't just about one woman's journey from poverty to prosperity. It's a mirror reflecting back the truth about every single one of us. How many times have you let other people's opinions define your worth? How many dreams have you buried because someone told you they was too big for someone like you? Mary Bell could have stayed bitter about every rejection, every humiliation, every door slammed in her face, but instead she chose to let that pain forge her into something stronger, something beautiful, something that could lift up others who was struggling just like she once did. The question that's burning in my heart right now is this: what are you gonna do with your own story of struggle? See, every tear Mary Bell cried, every back-breaking day she endured, every moment she thought she couldn't go on, none of it was wasted. The Lord was preparing her for a purpose bigger than her pain, training her heart to recognize others who needed the same grace she'd received. But here's the thing that might make you uncomfortable. Your current circumstances ain't your final destination unless you choose to stay there. You got the same strength running through your veins that Mary Bell discovered in herself. The same God who saw her through poverty and heartbreak is watching over your life right now, waiting for you to stop making excuses and start walking toward the destiny He's prepared for you. So I'm gonna ask you straight, are you gonna keep living like a victim of your circumstances, or are you finally ready to step into the powerful, purposeful life you was created for? If Mary Bell's story touched your heart and reminded you that no matter how dark your valley gets, there's always a mountain of hope waiting on the other side, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because we got more incredible stories of triumph, faith, and transformation coming your way. These ain't just stories. They're proof that ordinary people can live extraordinary lives when they refuse to give up. And don't you dare stop here. Click on that video appearing on your screen right now titled From Heartbreak to Hope, The Widow Who Found Love at 60. It's never too late to continue this journey of inspiration. Trust me, that next story is going to shake you to your core and show you just how mighty the Lord's plans can be when we surrender our pain to His purpose. Your breakthrough might be just one story away. Subscribe, notification bell, next video, or more life-changing stories.